Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. We are getting ready to do upgradable items today. That's where we left off yesterday. Yesterday we decided to make a new spear, and we made the new spear, made a very simple BAM for it, and then we left off at the time to do the item upgrade. So that's what we're going to try to uncover today. So as a first step, I thought we'd review a little bit about dialogue and a little bit about, we already did scripting a couple days ago, so we're just going to look at dialogue today. And then one of the very first tutorials I ever wrote was how to do upgradable items. So I'm actually, let me pull that up here. I'm actually going to drop this directly into chat for you guys. There we go. And this was, I just updated this, I want to say in January, I think. But before this was one of the very, very first tutorials I ever wrote. And it's because at the time people were like, you can't do this in a way that's compatible with other mods. And I was like, I don't think that's true. So we went ahead and did it. And then I wrote up a tutorial about here's how you do it. So we're going to take a quick look at Cromwell's. We're going to start with Cromwell. We're going to take a quick look at Cromwell's dialogue and just talk about dialogues in general. And then we're going to go through how to do an actual item upgrade. The nice thing about this too is that this is exactly what I use in item upgrade. So whether you want to do like one item upgrade or whether you want to do a mod like that where you have multiple, this technique can handle either, because it's, once you understand the mechanics behind the upgrades, they're actually pretty straightforward to do. So first, let's go ahead and pull up Cromwell is W. Smith, and we'll go ahead and take a look at this dialogue. So I know in the previous item pack, in the first series of streams when we actually built the item pack, we did talk about dialogue a little bit, but we'll start with a quick refresher. So in a dialogue, you have multiple states. Each state is basically a line of dialogue from the NPC. You have several entry states which require a state trigger. You can actually see here in the tree, these are Cromwell's three. He has 3 states with a trigger, so these are the 3 places where his dialogue can start. You can also, usually the order in which they're checked is the order in the dialogue, but you can also manually weight them. Cromwell's is not weighted, so it checks state 0 first, it checks state 57, and it checks state 58 in order. Like when you click on them, it looks for a valid trigger, and it does it in the order of the dialogue unless they're weighted, in which case it checks the lowest weight dialogue first, then the next, then the next. Each state will have, a line of dialogue from them. It can have optionally like a journal entry attached to it. Optionally, it can have a trigger if this is a state trigger, if this is meant to be an entry point to their dialogue. And then every state also has responses. Now, Near Infinity labels this as responses, but you should probably think in your mind these more as transitions, because these are, whether they have a PC reply or not, these are essentially where do we go from this state of dialogue. So this is number of times talked to. So this is the very, very first time you talk to Cromwell. You click on him, he says this, and then you're given 4 options. It has 4 places it can go from here. Now, in this case, each one of these is a player reply. So this is one where those 4 would be presented to the player as dialogue options. You'd select one, and then depending on which one you select, what do you have for sale here? It takes you to another state where Cromwell then has another line. And in this case, this also has PC replies. Now, not all states have a reply. Sometimes it's just the NPC, talking, and they'll have multiple lines. In that case, there would just be no responses, or there'd be one response with no PC reply, and it would just take you to the next state and their next line of dialogue. So, and the other thing too is the response can also just be an exit, right? It doesn't necessarily have to go to another line of dialogue. When it terminates, you'd basically have a transition that just exits. And we can see this a little bit if we're actually going to decompile this and actually look at decode. So the nice thing is, we do it the command line. If you give it a dialog file, it will spit out the actual decode. So this is what Cromwell's dialogue looks like, right? This is what we were just looking at. You have this is the entry state. There's our trigger. When you decompile it from Waidu, it will just number the states. But when you're doing your own code, the state names can be anything, right? This could be named intro. The only thing that matters is that with all these go-to commands, like if I name the state like, Cromwell's name, then anywhere I have go-to 1 would have to be go-to Cromwell's name. So just as long as the states are consistent within the D file, you can name them whatever is convenient for you. So just like I said, this has an entry state, the very simple num times talk to trigger. You've got 4 PC replies. The replies can also have their own triggers. So you can make these conditional about whether or not a reply should appear. And then each one of them goes to a different state, depending on what you answer. And so, here's a good example. So there's a charisma check in here, right? So you get, I'm Gabber, pleased to meet you. If you have 13 or higher charisma, if you have 12 or lower, you get the I'm Gabber if you really must know. And these go to slightly different replies too, from Cromwell. So, this one's a little bit, if you have higher charisma, it's a slightly nicer reply. If it's not quite as nice. So, that's kind of the way you can flavor the dialogue is with the occasional checks. But other than that, that's pretty much dialogue. The other thing you need to be aware of is the order in which transitions are evaluated. Now, all of these are, if you have a reply, that means the PC gets to select a reply. But you also have something like this. So in this case, there's no PC reply, and in this case, there's just one. So this is the classic options. If you get to the state, he just continues on to 9. And there is an action too. He sets a global to basically keep track that he's told you this already. And here is an exit. Right? If you get to state 10, he basically says this line, and then the dialogue ends. That's what the exit means. And he has a couple other exits too. I'm going to skip over 13 for the moment because 13 is where Cromwell does all of his work for the item upgrade. So we'll talk about that in a moment. I was trying to find I don't think he has any, which is unfortunate. Shoot. Okay. So I want to make a point about transition. So if there are only PC replies, the PC gets to pick, their reply, and then the dialogue continues based on that. But if you have transitions without PC replies, those are always weighted ahead of the PC's replies. So if there was something here that was just, if then like extern, like we're going to give like Nira a line here, right? If this was what state 0 looked like, this would always go to Nira's state 108. Always. Because anything without a PC reply is always evaluated ahead of PC replies. PC replies are the last resort. And we'll always check everything else. The other thing that's a little weird is that when it's evaluating, if we also had an extern, Minsk. It's also evaluated from the bottom up. So in this case, it would go to Minsk first and then Nira. Or not, and then Nira. It would just go to Minsk, and then wherever it goes from Minsk, this would be ignored. So if there's not PC replies, and then let's do something like, let's give these very simple checks. And then we'll do the same for the Nira. This is just as an example. Like this is you'll see this a lot more in quest coding. Like if you're being given a quest and like one of the NPCs jumps in with a comment, this is how it's done. So if this is what state 0 actually looked like, you would say, all right, you've got PC replies. I don't care about those because I've got these 2 transitions down here without PC replies. If Minsk was in the party, if this was true, then we're going to state 10 and be Minsk. Straight up, nothing else matters here. If Minsk is not in the party, then we check the next one, which is Nira. If Nira is in the party, then we're going to be Nira state 108. If Nira is not in the party, then we have exhausted our non-PC replies, and now we go, okay, finally. There's nothing else to do. Let's give the PC a choice. So the order of transitions is always stuff without PC replies is first, and it's evaluated from the bottom up. Gabber. Okay. The tokens. That's good. That's a good question. All right. Cromwell uses a bunch of tokens. Some girl boy race walking in and tokens. And then also the Gabber. The question on Gabber. So Gabber is the name of the person who's talking to the NPC. So if I had Janira initiate conversation with Cromwell, Gabber would be Jaheira. If I had Nira speak with Cromwell, Gabber would be Nira. It's the name of whoever they're talking to. As opposed to, I can just pull up the ISTP because it has all these tokens. So these are, where are they? Tokens. So Gabber. Oh, they even used Jaheira as the example. So yeah, you see these are all the tokens you can use. Girl, boy. He'll call you a girl, boy, depending on the gender. He, she, him, her. So Gabber is distinct as opposed to all of the pro is, that means player 1 specifically. It's like if you want to address a comment about player 1 specifically, you would use pro. Otherwise, all of this is relative to the speaker, right? So Cromwell uses, girl, boy, and then and then also race. Race is, so he can call you like elf or dwarf or gnome or whatever race is that they're talking to. So these are all in the ISTP. These are all the tokens you can use. Yeah. So if you spoke with Cromwell with Jaheira, it'd be A, who's there, some girl, half elf, wandering me smithy. I see. I rarely get visitors. What can I do for you, girl? Right. And as opposed to if you talked with Jan, it'd be who's there, some boy gnome wandering into me smithy. Something I can do for you, boy. Right. So these get evaluated based on who's talking to the NPC. So yeah, that's a good question. And like I said, but the thing is, these are the only tokens you have. And the other thing that's slightly annoying too is that I think none of them come capitalized. Because I remember this was a problem because I had written a dialogue and I had a he, she, but it was at the beginning of the sentence. But as I recall, it always evaluates to lowercase. So you just need to be a little bit careful using these at the beginning of a sentence because almost all these return lowercase. Just one little thing to be aware of. But yeah, Gabber is the actual name of the person talking to him. So, all right. So that's kind of our dialogue overview. Like I said, for transitions, the important thing, player replies are the last evaluated. Among the non-player replies, it's evaluated from the bottom up. And that's pretty much it. So for Cromwell specifically, right? If you look at the mechanics of Cromwell, you can ask him about what does he do here. who is he, etc. But eventually you're given the opportunity to ask, like, you basically ask, like, is this a normal shop? He says it's not. And then eventually you're going to end up in State 13. State 13 is kind of where everything happens. So, and this is why I'm glad I preface this with how transitions are ordered, because I'm actually going to do this in the D file, because this is, I think, a little bit easier to see. He has all of these transitions. And so the first one that gets evaluated is this. So if you have MISC 5K and none of these other items, and you'll notice, like, the next one, like, kind of cascades from this. The next one is if you have Sword, 2 hand 15, and MISC 8U. Or, I mean, if you have one of those two items and then none of these other ones. And then you notice the next two items on the list are the Halb. I'm pretty sure this is the Wave. I'm pretty sure Halb 09 is the Wave. And then Bow 19, which I'm pretty sure is Gessen's. Nice thing is, I think Near Infinity will actually list to them. And then at the very bottom, the very last response that's checked is if you have none of these items. So this is basically like, you ask him, do I have anything you can use? And he'll look through. And if you have nothing, if you have none of these items, you've got nothing. You got nothing I can use. Otherwise, if you have one of the items, if you have parts of the Equalizer, he'll make some comment out, oh, it's the Equalizer. Now, Cromwell's is very structured. Like, in State 13, he checks for not the entire formula, but he'll check for, like, a key item. So, he's checking the Lithium ore, but he's not checking if you have the Mace of Disruption. Right? So if you have the Lithium ore, which I suspect is, probably the last transition. Right, so if you have the Lithium ore, he doesn't, at this point in State 13, he's not checking the entire formula. He's just checking to see if you have one of the critical items from it. So if you have the Lithium ore, you come to an intermediate state where he's kind of like, oh, what's this? And here is where you have the transitions where he checks the rest of the formula, right? So if you don't have the Maces of Disruption, he just basically says, oh, if you had one, we could do something with it. And if you do have it, then he presents you the option of, we can do something with this. And you can ask further. Or you can say no thanks. And if you ask further, and if you go no thanks, then he checks for the next formula on his list. If you do say, what's involved, he'll tell you the cost. He'll tell you the standard unit will take a day. And then the player is given the choice, right? Let's do it. Or no. Right? And you'll notice these have all sorts of do I have anything else useful? And these basically would take you to the rest of the formulas. Or you can just say, no, I'm just going to leave. But if you say yes, and note that we have a gold check to make sure you have enough gold for whatever the formula takes. He takes your gold, he destroys it. This is to prevent the exploit of you being able to kill Cromwell and get your gold back, basically. You say that sounds... Oh, and really quick, on the entry to this state, note that we set a forge item, we set a variable. If we choose no, it sets that variable back to 0. I don't know why it set it there instead of here. It's a little backwards. That's one of the things that we're not going to be doing when we do our own. So, okay, so you agree to it. He takes your gold, he destroys the gold, and then he goes to a cutscene. At this point, everything is handed off to his area script. So, because the cutscene is cromwell.bcs, we can just open that up. Cromwell BCS is basically, it fades out, it recenters the camera, it fades in, it plays this visual, which is like the little hammer magical hammer hitting the forge, and does it twice. He swings in between. We fade out. We recenter the camera. We have Cromwell face you. The party gets rested. We advance time 16 hours so that total this is a full 24 hours. We fade back in. We set a global that basically says, hey, we did something. And then we end the cutscene. And then after that, Cromwell, this is Cromwell's area script, 0334. So forge stuff was set by the cutscene. At the end of the cutscene, it set forge stuff. Forge item was set in his dialogue based on what item you had him forge. So depending on, whether you had him make, Oncade armor or red dragon scales or chrome fey or whatever, forge item gets a different value. And you see basically his area script is where he takes the stuff for the formula. So we were looking at the Elysium. So it set forge item to 9. Forge stuff was set to 1 by the cutscene. And he says, all right, let's reset forge stuff back to 0. I'm going to take the lithium. I'm going to take the mace. I'm going to give you the new Mace's Disruption, and then I'm going to start dialogue with you again. So let's go back to Cromwell's dialogue. And so again, right, remember we have 3 entry points. So we have talked to him, so state 0 is no longer true. Forge item is still at 9 because he just forged the Mace of Disruption +2 for us. So our entry point is now state 57. So let's go out to state 57. Basically, all this says is it says, here you go, friend. And it resets forge item to 0. The area script is what had given you the item, which is why you're not seeing him give you the item here. And then this just exit. It's literally just, he forges it, he says, here you go, and then that's it. And then and the dialogue exits. And then if you talk to him again, right, this is still not true. This will only be true the very, very first time you meet him. Forge item got set to 0, so this is now no longer true. So now you have, this is your entry point, because forge item is now back to 0. And then this will, eventually you can go through his dialogue again, which will take you once again back to state 13, which is where he does all of his checks. So adding an upgrade to Cromwell is basically inserting a transition into state 13 for your own item, adding a few, the exact same checks that the other items have, right? You go to an intermediate state where you check for the full formula, where the player can decline at that state, or they can continue, at which point you name a price, and then they can either say yes at that point, and then you forge the item, or they could say no at that point, and they could go no and exit, or they can go no, what else do I have? So the neat thing with Waidu is that we have dialogue commands where you can basically copy transitions. So we're going to be adding a transition to the bottom of state 13, which means our new item is going to be checked before any of his existing formulas. And then at the end of it, if the player either doesn't have the items or declines, we're just going to copy everything that's already there in state 13 as the transition out if the player declines and wants to look for other items. So that's kind of the magic here, is we're going to be using a command called copy trans, which is short for copy transitions, that's going to let us insert our own upgrade and then preserve all of his checks and let him go through like the roll call for everything else. So, and that's pretty much the gist also of this, right? This is talking about how we do, how it's done already. And then we also have an example with Sespenar. So this is basically just the written example of what we just went through. Well, I didn't cover Sespenar, but it's the same idea, right? He has a master state where he does everything, or where he has all of his checks. Basically, you add your upgrade to the end of his list, and then you copy that state as the transition out of yours if you decline it. So we're going to go ahead and make our own upgrade today. So we're going to need a little bit of decode. In fact, we're going to start with this. We're going to start with just copying what's here and then modify it to our needs. So let's go ahead and start a D file. And this we're just going to name. So I could, you know, actually I am. I'm just going to add this to, oh, we already have an upgradable item in this. I did not remember that we had done one. Huh. All right, I totally forgot we did that. All right. Well, in this case, we're just going to do one of our own. The good news is we already have our own variable, which I'm going to use. Except this time we're going to do it just for Cromwell. Oh my goodness, I had totally forgotten we already had an upgradable item. Okay. All right, so we're just going to copy and paste. We're going to append W. Smith. Right, okay. So this is what we're doing here. We do not want to use... So Cromwell, all of his existing upgrades go through forge item. We do not want to reuse that variable because, you know, he uses 0 to 9. We don't know if some other mod wants to use 10 to 20 or 30 to 40, right? We're better off just using our own variable here. This is what item upgrade does. This is what we've done with our previous upgrade. But but because of that, though, we need to basically create our own intermediate state 57 because he's not going to come here when he's done our upgrade, but we basically need to clone state 57 into our own, except using our own variable that we're going to use in the area script and everywhere else. So the good news is we already started using G3C upgrade from the Sesminar update. So we're just going to use that again. So instead of CD Forge, we're going to use G3C upgrade. It's going to be a local variable update. And then I'm not... Okay. And then we're setting another global. I'm not sure if we actually need that or not. We'll get to that. Okay. So basically we've made our own state 57. The other thing that is important here is we have also named it here. We've given it a -1 weight. And what that does is, I mentioned this before, but Cromwell's dialogue is unweighted. But we've basically said ours is weight -1. Now, the weightings work from 0 to whatever. By making it weight -1, what Wido will do is we'll make ours, by putting it -1, it basically means it needs to be ahead of everything that's already there. So when it compiles, ours will actually become 0. This will become 1, this will become 2, this will become 3. So ours now actually takes precedent even above his normal, I've never talked to you before. But because we're basing it on a variable that's not going to be set at that time, it's not going to fire ahead of his initial greeting. So that's why we weighted as -1, because what we want is when he comes back from forging, we want ours to fire if this variable is greater than 0. So, and then we're just using an existing line. This is his existing line from state 57 already. And then the Cromwell upgrade done is just the internal name of the state that we're going to use. I think this is leftover. I don't think we actually need that. And so basically it's the same thing, right? He's going to come back and say, hey, here's your upgrade. We're all done. And then he's going to set this variable back to 0 so that this state doesn't fire when we talk to him again. And that's especially important because, again, we're putting this at the top of his dialogue stack. So the next thing is extending this critical state 13, right? This is where he checks for all of his upgrades. So we're going to extend bottom. That means we're adding it to the bot. It's going to be added as the last transition to state 13, which means it's going to be checked before everything else. So we're going to grab this. Except in this case, we are upgrading. Hold on, let me close some of this stuff. I was working on Icewind Vacation yesterday. All right. We are upgrading the new spear, which is, or not spear, new javelin, which is, I think, G3C ever, something or other. Yeah, here it is. All right, ever G. All right. So basically, instead of checking for random 3 items, we're just going to check for just the javelin directly. If the party has item, then we're going to go to an intermediate state called party has at least 1 item, which is all of this. So, and that's the other thing. We haven't decided on what the formula is, but we'll do that right now. So we already have an append, so I'm just going to combine these into a single append. An append means you're adding new states to the dialogue. Extend bottom means that we are going into W. Smith's dialogue, and at state 13, extend bottom means we're adding a transition. Specifically, we're adding this transition. Append means each one of these is a new state that we're adding. So, like I said, we're adding basically our wrap-up state. And then here, we've extended this to, if they have the Evergreen Javelin, go to W. Smith's party has at least 1 item, which we are defining here. And then, he's going to, the example from the tutorial is like, shards of a sword be combined. So he's going to say something about, oh, what's this javelin? And then only if the party has, this is where we do the full formula check. So I'm thinking, because this is the Evergreen Javelin, let's do, for the upgrade, let's say 2 emeralds is going to be the material component. So what's the item code for an emerald? Emeralds are MISC 43. So you can only get here if you have the javelin. So we're not going to do another party check. We're not going to do an item check for the javelin because you can't get here without the javelin. What we are going to do is, instead of party has item, because we want to, oh, get back here. What is this? MISC 43. Now, because we want, I'm going to say 2. We can't use party has item because we want to make sure they have 2. So we want to do, I think it's, I just gave this to another mod to it. I can't remember. I think it's party. Oh, God damn it. Let me just pull up the ISDP. It's like number of party items. I'm not joking. Like, I literally just gave this to Zen Black on the crew for Pits of Despair. Not Highland Match Case. I'm looking for. Not party has item. Not party gold. Not party gold. Num and party is party members. Num items party. There we go. Num items party greater than. Because as long as they have more than 1 emerald, they have enough. Because we're going to ask for 2. So we want num items party greater than 1. So if they have more than 1 emerald, which means they have 2 or more, right? They could have 20. As long as they have at least 2, then the party can ask. Then, okay, so if you don't have it, he's going to just basically say you don't have any, and you're going to end up here to party doesn't have all parts. Or he's going to say, like, you need emeralds to do this. If you do have it, he's going to go straight into how much. Oh, why is this? Oh, I think this is actually wrong. This should, okay, yeah, this should be going to party has all parts. Okay. We had a bad transition in the tutorial. I'm going to have to go back and fix that. So now you'll notice this one we left blank because if they have the emeralds, they're going to go to party has all parts. Now you could do the opposite, make this an opposite trigger so that one of these two things will fire, but it's pointless because if this isn't true, they're going to be forced to go on this. So there's no point in putting a trigger here. You could put the opposite trigger, but it's pointless because this is always, if this isn't true, then this is where they have to end up. So they're either going to have the emeralds or they're not. If they don't have the emeralds, he's basically say, you need to go get the emeralds. And then moving right along is going to be our state where he looks for the remainder of the upgrades. If they do have the emeralds, party has all parts, then he'll basically say, hey, we can do this. It'll cost. Basically he'll just say, hey, we can upgrade this. And then you can reply how much or not interested. And if you do not interested, you end up in that same moving right along, which is where he checks for other updates. If you say how much, then you come here where he'll quote you the price and then you have to stay for a day. Now, unlike his existing upgrades, I like to do everything right here. So if he if you get him to do it, then we're going to set G3C upgrade to 1 because these numbers, just as long as they're unique, as long as the variable and the value are unique to your mod, you're fine. Just so this is why you want to use your own prefixed variable here. Just make sure it's consistent. And then I'm going to make this upgrade cost. Let's make this a 5,000 gold upgrade. So he's going to take, let's see. Oh, actually, this needs to be take party item num, comma 2. Then he's also going to take the javelin itself, which is the evergreen javelin. And this is going to be 5,000 gold. So the check needs to be 4,999 instead. And then again, notice here you can bail or you can exit the dialogue altogether. And then 56 is his existing state. 56 is his. All right, let's get forging. His basically, we're starting right away, and then he starts his cutscene. So the nice thing is, we can use this existing state. We don't have to have our own exit. We can use his existing exit. And then we're also doing the same thing for, if we just want to exit the dialogue, we're going to 12, which is an existing all right, well, we'll see you later then. And then he exits the dialogue for us. All right. And then increment, for example, is a go-to party a global variable? No. All of these labels are purely internal. This will get compiled and this will become if we were to compile this right now, this would become just state. What's Cromwell's last state right now? He's got 58 states. This would just become 59. This would be 60, 61, 62, 63, 64. These are just purely internal labels. And you just need to make sure that, when I say, I want you to go to party all as parts, there needs to be a state named party all parts, right? I could name this, stuff, right? And right now it wouldn't compile because there's no state name stuff. Right? These are just purely internal labels that tell it where to go. And the existing states are just numbers. So that's why if we want to go to something that's existing or we target something that's existing, we have to use the numbers, right? We're going to 12. We're going to 56. or we're going to moving right along, which is a new state that we're adding. So these are just purely internal labels. So you want to name them something that's useful to you, because when you come back to the dialogue, you want to be able to like, oh yeah, that's what I was doing. So these disappear once you compile, right? So once we compile this, if we were to ask Waidu to decompile it, these get lost, right? Like I said, these will just get converted to straight state numbers. But you don't want to use state numbers, because if if this is being installed after item upgrade, Cromwell's first available state is not going to be 59. So that's why you use labels here. You just want to make sure that these are internally consistent with themselves, because they're going to get turned into numbers and irrecoverable numbers, right? If I decompile it, like, it's not going to name this, it's not going to remember that the state used to be Cromwell upgrade done. So these state names just make them consistent and understandable to you. Like I've seen people who do NPCs who are like, this is like XO3.A, and I'm like, name it something useful, right? Name it something useful. The only other thing is you need to make sure that they're unique. Like, I can't name, if I already have a Cromwell upgrade done, I can't also name this one Cromwell upgrade done. So if I'm doing like if I was doing like multiple upgrades here, I would have to do like party has all parts, but specific to the javelin. So it would be like, javelin. And then I would have to, make sure that the party has all parts, that these two now match. But since we're just doing one, we could be lazy and just use, these very, very simple labels. So if you're doing multiple, they do need to be unique. That is one thing to be careful of, because otherwise Waidu will crap out when it's trying to compile. So, okay. Yeah, so the names are just purely internal, just so Waidu knows where to go. So the other thing is, let's pull up our tray file. Oh good, I already have it open. Is this where I've been doing dialogue? I think it is. Just double checking that this is. Did we do our dialogue here? Is it a different? Okay, yeah, we did do our dialogue here. Okay. So we're just gonna manually trayify this. All right. So, and yeah, that's the other thing, right? This say can be an existing string reference. It can be just like other strings. It can be text directly here. But instead, we're going to say this is going to be when he sees that you have the javelin, and so we're just going to say, all right. I'm going to say, what's this javelin? And then from there, either you have it or you don't. And if you don't, he's going to then say 1074. And because he's a dwarf, you can always throw in eyes, because eyes are very dwarfy. Right. A fine javelin with a pair of emeralds. We could make it even better. Not better, better. We're not playing baseball. All right, so that's our upgrade. And then if you do have everything, we're going to say instead 1075. Yeah. 1075. I was going to say, so this is going to be the follow-up with, what's this javelin? Oh, and ye have some emeralds as well. I'm sure we can use those to make your javelin. I just used the phrase even better, so I want to, let's say, improve your javelin even more. Yeah, I mean, this is on. I'll say it before, as if you haven't observed it already. Dialogue is not my forte. This is very, very simple and very functional dialogue. All right. So that was 1075. Ta-da. All right, 1075. And then this will actually just take verbatim. That's going to be at 1076. At 1076. It'll cost you 5,000 gold on my apprentice. And you save the day to run the forge. Oh, and then we need the PC replies. And yeah, I'm just going to take these verbatim as well. Let's take this. It's going to be 1077. Normally you could just write this and trayify it, but being as it's only a handful of lines, I don't. And then this is the same for both of these. It's going to be... Because trayifying is the vastly easier way of doing this. Because those are going to be the same line. And finally we need it at 1079. Which is going to be... No, I don't think so. I think I'll be going now. Oh, except I need to copy that. All right. So there, now it's all trayified. We've got all of our dialogue written. Nothing else is here. So that should be it. So this is already, if this was a new D file, we'd have to compile it, but this is already being compiled by the main mod. Yep, so it's already being compiled because we just added it to the existing. So let's see if we've done this right. Oh, okay. Actually, let me step back first. That's the dialogue. We still need to do the part where Cromwell actually, post cutscene, gives you the item. So let's jump back to the tutorial and we'll grab the next batch of script here. So that was what we just did, the dialogue. And then this gets added to his area script. So for this, we're going to need to make a new BAF file. So let's go to our BAF folder. We're just going to name this after the area. The new text document. This is going to be aro334.baf. All right. And the variable we're using, again, this needs to match the dialogue. We're using... Oh, I missed this. Sorry, let me get one last line here. 1080. This is always good for the translators. All right, nothing else, right? Okay. Oh. And this is going to be at 1081. Okay. Oh, and then I did this very quickly, but here is where if we decline the upgrade or if we don't have the items, you know, if we don't have all the parts, or if he says we have all the parts and we say we're not interested, or we don't have the gold, it kicks you into moving right along, and then we're copying all the transitions from his state 13. So if we say no to the upgrade of the javelin, then it gets all of the existing transitions from 13. Now, it's critical because one thing that you might notice is that we are adding to state 13. The copy trans is always executed first. So any changes we make to state 13 will not, copy trans will capture it before it alters state 13. That's not a matter of the order that I put them in the dialog file. Like I can move this to the top. The transitions are copied before Waidu makes any other changes. There are other copy trans that you can do where it will capture it afterwards. But for us, we don't want this to get forced into a loop. because we're extending 13. Because otherwise what would happen is this would say, oh, you've got the Javelin, and then you get caught in a loop. Copy trans executes first. So it will copy everything that's in state 13 before it gets extended. That's not, like I said, that's not a matter of where this, of, you know, the order this gets executed in the decode. Copy trans always copies what's there first. So that's why you can do this without having to worry about infinitely looping through state 13. So I just wanted to add that real quick. All right, so let's go back to our state 13. So we are going to, we're using the global G3 upgrade my area 1. So instead of CD Forge, we're doing this. We are reusing the existing Forge stuff because his cutscene sets it. So basically, we're basically saying if there's an upgrade and we just finished the cutscene, then we're going to clear that variable. And then we're going to give the upgraded sphere, which we've not made yet, which I'm just going to call G3C Ever 2. And then he's going to start dialogue again. And because G3C upgrade will still be at 1, the dialogue that he's going to start with is going to be this, because it's equal to 1, so this condition is true. And because this is weighted the highest out of his dialogue, this will get checked first. It'll say it's true. We'll get this line for sure and not anything else in his dialogue. So because we have a new bit of area script, we need to make sure that we extend his area. AR 0334. And this isn't set Cromwell's. All right, well, great. Sespinar runs very similar, except he has his own personal script that he does this, whereas Cromwell uses the area script. It's one of those minor differences. So I think that should compile and work. So let's reinstall. Let's actually uninstall this because I added that since I was doing a little bit of compatibility testing this morning. Oh, and then one other little bit of bookkeeping. I remember yesterday we found that the Realm Shaper's brush was referencing spells that weren't present. It turns out that was something I didn't need, so I purged all those references. So that's all. I did that offline because I needed to remind myself of how the Realm Shaper's brush works, since it was very complicated. It turns out that was a leftover spell that was not needed, so I just deleted the references to it and made the commit last night, and everything works. So let's reinstall. Okay, now if that worked, let's reload this. Let's go to Cromwell's dialogue. So now, again, we've extended state 13. You notice now we have an extra response, and we extended bottom. So sure enough, if we have the Evergreen Javelin, then it'll say, what's this Javelin? And then we go one of two places. If we have 2 emeralds, or if we don't. Now, if we don't have the emeralds, he says, oh, that should be a comma. There's our first mistake. A fine javelin, a pair of emeralds, we could make it better. There's no other reply, so you just continue. Well, let's see what you got then. And then here you see this is copied from state 13. So then he starts checking, do you have Shadow Dragon Scales? Do you have Ankh Shells? Do you have the Crom Prayer Scroll? Do you have, the Wave, the Lithium, the Equalizer, right? He does all of his normal checks. Now, if we do have the emeralds, he'll say, oh, you've got emeralds too. Well, we can use those to improve your javelin. And then the PC is given 2 replies. What would that take? Or no. So if you say no, we end up right back where we were before if we didn't have emeralds in that same state 13 item list. If we are interested, we come here and it says it'll cost you 5,000 gold and it'll take you a day. Just say, yes, if you have 5,000 gold, you can say, let's do it. In which case we start the upgrade. We set the upgrade variable. We take the gold. The other thing you'll notice is I'm destroying the gold and I'm destroying the items. That's because, again, this is to close the exploit of these would just stay in his inventory. So this was the old exploit of when you did an item upgrade with Cromwell, you could then pickpocket him and get your items back. So that's why as soon as we take the party item, we destroy it. Because we don't want that exploit to be there. And same with the gold, right? We take the gold and we immediately destroy it. And this is just to close that exploit of being able to kill or pickpocket Cromwell to get your items back. So, yes, let's do it. Or I'm not interested, in which case, again, we go back to the original formulas. Or we can say, no, never mind, I'm going now. In which case, we go back to an existing state and it ends. Now, if we choose to forge, he does all this, he sets the variable, he goes to his existing closing dialogue, he starts the cutscene, he does the variable, or he does the cutscene, he sets the forge stuff variable. Now, remember how I said we were waiting our new state? There it is, right there at the top of the stack. So after that cutscene, G3C upgrade will still be at 1, so this will be a true trigger. And it'll basically say, hey, there you go, have fun. Here's your item. And then basically, he will set the global back to 0 so that this state 59 is now no longer true. And if you speak to him again, you'll get the normal, I've come back to talk to you dialogue. So there we go. The only other little bit is we also, we added to his area script. And sure enough, there it is. Oh, wait. Oh, did I extend top? Why is... Did I extend the wrong thing? Oh, this isn't saved. Okay. It did append, but it gave it a blank file because I hadn't saved this yet. Okay, I was like, it absolutely should be there. If there's some syntax error, it should have thrown it. All right, let's try. Let's rerun this one more time. That's why it's showing up as modified, but nothing actually changed. There we go. And we're getting a little warning because we've not made the upgraded spear yet. So it's basically saying, hey, you're trying to give an item that doesn't exist. We know. But like I said, forge stuff gets set by Cromwell's normal cutscene. We set it back to 0. But G3 upgrade is still at 1. And then his dialogue will set that back to 0 and reset everything for any future updates that he wants to do. So there is our upgradable item with Cromwell. So one thing still on our to-do list is we need to make the upgraded spear, which we can do right now really quickly. One thing I did want to mention, it's the Infinity Engine was kind of set up before you had... It's not like Diablo, right? The idea of random loot is very much not how the item system was built. Items are very discrete. You can't attach effects to items on the fly. You can't change the inherent properties of an item. So you have to have, it's a little frustrating, but you have to have like separate items for stuff like this. It's not like we can take the existing spear and then just add a few effects on the fly and make it the upgraded spear. It's literally a brand new item, and that's true for all of the upgrades. It's just and it's the same thing if you were to look at like the two-handed axes and stuff from Tweak's Anthology. It basically has to create new copies of items for all of this stuff. It's a limitation on the engine. So that's why we can't just say, hey, add some effects to the spear and make it better. It literally is like a new item. So let's make that really quick. I know we still haven't decided like what little extra perks to add to it, but for now at least we'll go ahead and make a copy of it. G3 see ever. We're gonna make a copy of it, and I named it ever 2. And the one thing I am sure of is we're gonna want it to be It's going to be a +4. So that means we need to improve its... For every level enchantment, speed goes down, so it gets a little faster. It's now +4 to hit. Hello, Chaco-chan. It's now +4 damage. And then same with melee. The speed improves. The bonus to hit improves. The damage bonus also improves. And nothing else changes for now. So let's go ahead and save that. Let's put this into the item folder. Okay. And then let's actually go back and then, because we did have that one typo too. Yeah, that should be a comma. And I always proofread this afterwards and see if I and look at whether we can make the dialogue better, because it's very plain. But we do need, so I'm going to change the name of the original one. It's going to be Evergreen Javelin +3. And then let's do the description and name now for the upgraded one, which is going to be 82 and 83. Except it's now going to be +4. Still a placeholder. It's now going to be +4s all around. Speed factor drops to 2. Still 5 strength, still 2 weight. Okay. And then it needs to be copied over as well. Okay. So we can just copy this. I still need to double check that, so that's also going to have to be a to-do item for this as well. And for now, we're just going to have it use the exact same, the exact same BAM. All right, so except in this case, we are copying the second one. That's going to be 82 and 83. We want the same thing. It's going to grab the throwing flags. It's going to use the same projectile. And then we may need the damage bumps, what that's going to say. We're going to leave that for now. Actually, you know what? Okay, this is an opportunity for us to combine some code. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to copy these separately because they have different names. But then after that, so that I don't have to duplicate this code, I've copied them individually, and then we're going to do because the same changes need to be made to both. So rather than having duplicate code, we can just so we copy them over, we give them their unique names, but then they both need the same projectile and the same throwing flags. They need the same edits made to them. So we're going to combine that so that I only have to do that in one place. This is one of those maintenance tricks where somebody would look at this and be like, why are you doing it this way? And there's a reason why. Actually, we can compact this even more. Yeah, let's not do it. Okay, I'm not going to get into it, but usually if I have code like this, if there's any way you can combine it so that you're not duplicating your own code across the mod, this is just a very, very simple maintenance hack that you can do where don't be afraid to copy and then recopy your items if it can save you time like this. Because again, like if I know, if I were to come back and realize that there's something else I need to do with it, now I only need to do it in one place instead of two. The other possible answer is I could force this all into a macro and then apply a macro here and apply a macro here. But for as simple as this is a substantially easier operation. So, and then, like I said, these are being copied from the mod. And then at this point, they're in the game. So now we use copy existing instead. All right, anything else need to be changed here? Nope, that should be it. Let's double check that this works. There we let's double check that we get 2 spears and that they're named, or 2 javelins that they're named appropriately. Yep, we got a +3, got a +4. They're both using the spear projectile. They're both using the proper flags. Yep, and then this one is, yep, speed 2, bonus to hit 4, damage bonus 4. Speed is 3, to hit 3, damage 3. All right, we're good to go. We've got our 2 spears. Like I said, we'll still add a perk, and then obviously I still need to write the actual item description. Right now, they're also still using both the normal and the upgraded are both using the same icon, which I'm fine with, but I might revisit that. We'll say because the upgrade requires a couple of emeralds, maybe I'll do the +4 with that emerald on the haft. We'll see. I'll play around with that, but that's an art thing that will take me a little bit of time to think about what I want to do with it. So, but there's our Cromwell upgrade. So we're over an hour into it. So let's go ahead and take a break. I'm going to grab a tea and a cough drop, and then we'll be back in a couple of minutes. And I'm gonna use the break to double check the list and see what are some stuff that people have asked to talk about that we've not covered yet. Because I think for now, that's the last of the item pack stuff I had to look at. So I think we can. I know we had somebody had wanted me to talk a little bit more about how to use arrays. That was one of them, and I think there was some other stuff. So I'm going to double check the thread on G3 and see if there's anything else people want to talk about. And if you guys in chat, if there's something else that you guys want me to cover, let me know and we'll get to it. So, but otherwise, let's take a quick break. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. Grab yourself a tea or whatever, and we'll get going. All right, welcome back. So I had a quick look at kind of requests that of stuff that people still want to go through. I think we've covered a lot of it. I did notice that a couple of the requests, like increments here, you had asked about animations for new weapons and creature animations. Those, I think I know what I touched on this briefly when we were talking about BAMs, but just they're such a convoluted and awful mess that the few times I've looked at doing something like that, I've concluded immediately that it's not worth it, because it's essentially hand editing of, you know, dozens if not hundreds of frames, and you know, very small, and specifically in, you know, Photoshop or whatever, or GIMP or whatever art program you use. So I'm not going to get into that too much. You also had the question about centralized versioning. I'll show you how I do it. I wouldn't say it's the right way to do it, but you'll notice that from time to time that I will have, usually I'll just commit it as like library updates, and you'll notice actually G3 CIP has a couple. So if we go to our history, we've got library updates, and you'll see just it's usually it's just meta information, but sometimes it'll actually be actual improvements. So I'm going to show you how I organize this stuff locally and what I do. There's probably a substantially better way to do this in Git itself, because what I do is I just hard link stuff. So this is, I think I've shown this before. Oh, let me go ahead and add that while I'm thinking about it. Actually, let me make this commit now that we're thinking about it. So first let me do this. We're going to do upgradable javelin. Oh yeah, I need to add the javelin itself. So first let me make this commit. Boom. Okay. All right, so on G3 itself, there is or say on the G3 GitHub, I should say, we have a repository known as the modding resources. This is, I want to say about, maybe a year ago, I went through and I tried to collect macros and functions and bits of code that I use repeatedly across projects and centralize them. So this was a project I went through. Yeah, I want to say it was probably like a year and a half ago. And I basically made a code and a functions folder in here. So this includes stuff I'm actively using my mods, as well as a lot of the smaller things that I use in like that semi-useful why-do thread that's on G3 where people just kind of post fun little functions. I have now collected these here, and I tried to standardize them too. So, you know, like game checks, right? I tried to, and I also tried to standardize the meta, right? So I basically said, here's what this is, here's what it does. And then for my own internal reasons, for my own internal reference, where I'm using it. So I know if this updates, I know which mods are gonna have a little red icon up here. And then the actual code. And so I tried to standardize this. So that's like game checks. I wrote that originally for Anthology. I now use it for a bunch of other stuff. The CPM variables, the clones, and then same thing for functions, right? I've got a whole bunch of like my alter header. This is basically basically like alter effect except for headers. So I wrote this for the various fix packs, and I use it a bunch of places. And then I usually put a platform. And I try to keep a version history. Basically, this was one that I wrote, I don't know when, and it hasn't updated since. So the version history is just unknown because I wrote it once, and I've not had to update it or change it. And so on my local drive, I have this locally. Where's my modding resources? There we go. So if I need to upgrade, update the game checks, everywhere that this is used, you notice I've got symbolic. I mentioned symbolic link here. Bullet Sponge is hard linked to this file. So if I were to update this, you would notice I would get these 6 mods. Well, I'll say, hey, now there's a change because they're hard linked to use this file. So that's how I organize stuff locally. And then, so the modding resources GitHub is like my master version of all of these functions. So, what was something I updated recently? Oh no, that's something I added. I'm looking for something I actually updated. Yeah, okay. So this one, back in April, I added return values. So I try to keep histories of what I do stuff. Yeah, okay, this is something this is something I originally wrote for the fix pack and then found I didn't need it, but it was convenient to use somewhere else. So this was originally for the fix pack because the fix pack had so many places item charges were wrong. Like items were overcharged or undercharged or had an expiry value, or if we needed to make something droppable or undroppable or, whatever. So I basically, because the item format on areas and creatures are identical, basically these two, they take the same parameters for alter area and alter creature item, and then they're fed into this macro, which actually does the work. So you notice these two basically just define the item number and the item offset, and then passes along all these arguments to alter area creature item, which actually does the work. So anytime I update this, if I were to find a bug in this, something that needs to be fixed, I'd update it here. And then because all of these are all hard linked out, right, the fix pack would update, Icewindification would update, the internal Icewind Dale spells library would update, the calling would update. So that's how I organize it myself. Now, I know on Git, there's probably a way you could set up probably dependencies, but being as I'm pretty much the only people who use these, it's at least from my point of view, it's a lot of overhead for dealing with it that I've not just bothered to set up. I just hard link everything locally. So that's how I set up my own libraries. The next question we had was talking about arrays. If you've done any programming, how you expect arrays to work is probably not how they work in Waidu. Because there are some very, very simple things you can do with arrays in programming languages that Waidu won't let you do. Like you can't sort them. You can't get a count. You can't arbitrarily select the 4th element in them. You can't randomize them. They stay in the order that you define them. The only thing you can do, and if you want to remove an element, you basically have to blank the entire array. You can't just get rid of an element out of an array. So otherwise, the basic point of an array is Waidu uses associative arrays. So you're associating a key with a value. And let me see if I can pull up where would be a nice simple place that I'm using arrays that we could talk this through. Let's go to excuse me, I'm sorry, my allergies are still bothering me. I've got arrays all over Anthology. So let's find a nice simple place for I must have mistyped it. Okay. How is that turning up any results? All right, let me think of where I have a very simple example that we're using this. Maybe how about a patch PHPH? Now I should get hits. Oh, that's so annoying. Okay. Okay. All right, maybe we'll just dive into the we do documents then really quick. All right. I know it's got a whole section on arrays. We can use that as our starting point. Oh yeah, and Waidu has all sorts of. Remember how we're talking about copy trans? There's a whole tutorial on how it works. The Waidu docs themselves have some great stuff. I think it's called Working with Arrays. Macros. Oh, the array construct. Here we go. All right, so it gets a little esoteric here, but kits to collabs. Oh, that's a good example. I'll bet I have some in Icewindification. Should have some then. All right, let's pull up Icewindification since I've been playing around with that lately. And in fact, I think specifically the Druid stuff. Yeah, here we go. Okay. So this is about as simple as it gets. So this component for Icewindification basically adds a whole bunch of new polymorphing abilities to druids, and basically dumps their existing polymorph abilities and instead adds the Icewind Dale series. So I've set up a very, very simple array here for processing. On the left, this is so on the right is the spell. This is the spell that polymorphs. On the left, this is both the name of the item and the creature that the spell creates. So I've just out of habit, I clear the array. This array shouldn't exist, but just as a precaution, I like to clear array. So I clear the array, and then I define this array. And so you have, these are your keys, these are your values, and then you indicate their relationship with the little arrow. So the CDIA 480 key is associated with this value. Now what can we do with that? We turn around and you process them with a PHP each. You can do this, in this case, we're doing this as an action. If you do this, you can also do this as a patch. There's a patch PHP each. And you do the same thing, right? You use the name of the array, and then you define two variables that you're going to refer to these columns as. In this case, I'm using resource and spell. So I'm using this as a base. So it's gonna process these 7 entries, and so first it's going to take the spell, and it's going to create these spells because we're using the key as the spell. We're going to give it a name. We're going to use the left column as this is 3A. I believe this is the spell icon. Yes, that is the spell icon. So basically this is essentially a template spell. We're giving it a custom icon based on what it's going to be named. We're doing the same on the spell header. We're using that same icon. In this case, like for the first entry, this would be CDIA 480B, CDIA 480B. And then match opcode 111. This is the polymorph form. So basically, this is going to be you
you're going to be given the weapon CDIA 480. That's what opcode 111 is. That's what this is doing. So it's going to process this array, and it's going to create all of these polymorphing spells, each one using its own icon and each one giving its own item, which are essentially the polymorph paws. And we're doing this just by processing this array. So instead of having like 7 different copies where we do this, we just set up a very, very simple array. And then we're copying over the creatures and the items and the item and the spell bams that match all this stuff. This is about as simple as it gets with arrays. We basically set up a list, and then we individually process items in that list, doing whatever it is we need to do. In this case, we're making we're using 7 polymorph forms. We've reduced it. We're using a template spell, and then basically processing these each repeatedly. Instead of having to do the same chunk of code like 7 times, this is how we're doing it. And because, if these were like, if this is the same thing on both sides of this, you could just do this as like one big copy existing. But because each one is, the stuff on the left is unique, there's no, like these, like the last 4 entries are identical, but the first 3 are not. So that's why I use an array instead of just processing through 7 entries. So this is about as simple of a use of arrays as you can find. One other useful thing that you can do with arrays is you can also store data for later processing. One of the big things, excuse me one moment. One of the big things I try to focus on for Tweak's Anthology version 17 was efficiency. I built a whole test build to try and cut down on the number of, so many things are like, we're going to modify all items, so we're going to copy 7,000 items. And then you get to the next one, which is also changing items. Okay, we're going to copy 7,000 items again. And so I tried to look at ways to cut down on the number of just massive regular expression copies there are in Anthology. And most of the ways I experimented with didn't end up saving me a lot of times, but one thing that I did start using was, and this is thanks to Kathos and EET, is the joinable NPC array. And that is, I think it is just joinable NPC array. Yep. Okay. And credit where credit due, this is really from Kathos. So Kathos's original chunk of code here would basically do a regular expression, go through every NPC in the game, and then from that make a smaller array of just joinable NPCs. Now, the reason why I made my own was because Kathos just output an array of joinable NPCs. However, if you've installed Tweaks, you know that, for example, the maximum hit point creatures, you can choose between whether you apply to joinable or non-joinable NPCs. So I needed an array that had joinables and non-joinable, a way to distinguish the two of them. So essentially what this does is, and it's also per game too. So what it does is that, I'm going to skip to the Baldur's Gate 2 section because this is the actual bit of array. So what it does is it looks for P dialogue. So if you have a joinable NPC, they're going to have an entry in P dialogue. This is essentially the 2DA file that tells the engine how to change an NPC's dialogue if they're kicked out of the party. So if they're joinable, they're going to have a P dialogue entry. So this is all Kathos's code. So basically it looks through P dialogue, it grabs the death variables of all the creatures that are there because those are all going to be your joinable NPCs. And then what it does is that it copies every creature in the game. It looks for their death variable, and if they were let me back up 1 second. So it goes through P dialogue, and it basically sets their creates a new array called joinable NPC array 2DA. that basically has their death variables. Here it is. Their death variables are added to an array. You go through the creatures. You check to see if their death variable means that they're a joinable NPC. If they are joinable, they're added to the joinable NPC array as their file name and their death variable. If they're not joinable, this is basically the little bit that I added, that they still go into the array, but they're added with a 0 instead of a death variable. So I can now process this array, right? So remember, on the left is the source file, right? So this is going to be, adequate. This is going to be like Arenicus.cree. This is going to be Imuin.cree, Imuin2.cree. This is going to be Jahiras. This is going to be, the Harpers. This is going to be ghouls, gas, every creature in the game. And they're either going to be associated with a 0 if they're not joinable, or their death variable if they are joinable. And then I turn around and and instead of doing like a full reg-ep, like I'll use this array to, let's bring up one of the max HP creatures. Oh, this is the post-processing. Yeah, okay, hold on 1 second. What is the component name or the component number for this? All right, let's pull up 3011. So 3011 is the maximum hit points, but only for non-party joinable. So we include max H. This is the macro that actually does the work. Joinable NPC array. This builds the array if it's not already been built. And now we want to run the macro for NPCs that are not party members. So in this case, we go through and we process the joinable NPC array as file to death variable. Now, remember, if they're not joinable, their key value was 0. So basically, if it's an int, if it's 0, then we know they're not joinable, and then we process them. Now, if it's like Imoen, then the DV is going to be Imoen, and so she'll be skipped because it's not an integer. So this is another simple way we're using an array to basically distinguish like classes of creatures, right? They're either joinable or they're not. And by doing an int check, because I set it up very deliberately, it's either going to be a 0 or it's going to be their death variable, which is a string. This gives me a very easy way to process every creature in the game, either as joinable or not. So that's the non-joinable. So the version for joinable is just the exact opposite check. It's now if it's not an int. Because, again, if it's 0, that means they're not joinable. So we want to exclude those and run this just for joinable party members. So that is another way you can use arrays. In this case, we're just doing a very, very simple, I don't want to say sort, but basically we're basically dividing creature files into they're either A or they're either B. So that's another way you can use arrays. Now, the most complicated ways you can use arrays. So far, I've been showing you arrays where it's just one key value, or one key and one value, right? These, like I said, this is the simplest array you can have, right? You got one key, one value. There's always only one value. We're going to look at something horrifying. Where's my armor array? The common armor array. Told you it was ugly. You can have multiple keys. You can still only have one value for those keys, but you can have multiple comma separated keys. So this is, for example, for the for the tweaks that allow like thieving and heavy armor, and for the tweaks that allow mages to cast an armor but with a miscast penalty, there's no good automatic way to just search through items and be like, oh, this is chainmail. Oh, this is a medium shield. Oh, this is whatever. The other problem is too, being as this is meant to cover mod items, the number of mod items that like, oh, it's chainmail, but you can cast, there are 1,000 variants of Elven Chain where basically it's chainmail, but you can cast in it. So something like that, it's like, okay, there shouldn't be a casting penalty, but there should be thieving penalties. And that's just the simple example. There's also, I found item packs that have like +5 full plate. There's like, there's no casting penalties. And it's like, what? So even if I did have an algorithm that could help me that would easily let me just look at a few things in the item and be like, oh, this is full plate, or oh, this is chain, or oh, this is Elven Chain. I found that I had made so many exceptions that it was better literally just to keep a manual list of items and then process them. So essentially this I generate out of, believe it or not, a spreadsheet. If it feels like opening, there we go. Opening the other window. Let's bring you over. And I do this because I find that this is a lot easier to work with than that code. So here's my armor array. Oh, that's the output. Here's the armor list. So I basically keep everything here. Yeah, I've got my tables, right? So like channel 1, this is like basic chainmail. This is underscore channel 1. This is basically the 2.2 version of basic chainmail. The old class, this is what I used to use before I went to the table. I keep a thing, appearance. I don't think I actually used that anywhere. So for the miscast armor, it gets a 30% penalty. These are the thieving penalties it gets if you use the thieving. And the notes is just generally just what it's called. And then I have this, which basically takes all that data and concatenates it into the form that you see in the actual array. So let's, sorry, wrong window. Let's try that again. All right. So you can see all that gets turned into an array entry. So yes, this, and you notice stuff is duplicated. And the reason why I do that is, so let's go back to the very, very simple array. So we've got this. Now, if I were to add CDIA 480 to, let's say, something brand new, let's say CD new. One of the important things that you need and have to remember about arrays is they're not just a list. The values in the left column have to be unique. In this case, like if I were to actually try to process this array, this line, because these values are not unique, this updates this. So essentially this replaces that entry. I've now associated CDIA 480 with CD new, and this entry no longer exists. So I don't know if you guys remember, but we used to have a bug in Icewindification and SES both add spell scrolls. And we had a bug where we were not adding spell scrolls, because essentially what we had done is we had basically listed like, stuff like the array looks something like we'd have like, stone skin or, well, okay, no, we were adding Icewind Dale spells. So we had like shout, and we're like, okay, we're going to add it to, Candlekeep. And we're going to also add it to Murkath and BG2. And we're also going to add it to the Sorceress Sundries. Essentially a list like this. And of course, people were like, you say you've added a shout script to Candlekeep, but I can't find it. Or you said there's a shout scroll at Murkath's Lair, we can't find it. Because of course, we said, all right, we've made this entry. This now updates it. That essentially deleted that entry, and then the third one deleted that. So only the last entry on this was working. So the very easy solution was simply to invert these values, right? We made it work instead like this. Come back here. Because now these are unique. So sometimes it's as simple as you can just invert it and associate it in the other direction. But then, the problem very easily you could see is if we weren't specific enough, right? If we also tried to add Great Shout to Candlekeep, then we run into the same problem of now we're adding Great Shout but not Shout. So you need to be a little bit careful with your keys. You can't be too lackadaisical, and just that's a very big takeaway here is that the keys have to be unique, because otherwise what you're essentially doing, you're saying, no, I want you to take this existing key that we have and update it. But that brings back this to, if I didn't have the item names as the first element here, like if you were to just look at this is identical without the item resource there. So that's why this is duplicated. It's purely so that each one of these elements will actually be unique because this is here. That's the only reason. It's redundant, but it keeps the keys unique because each one of these, there's only one entry for one item. So that's why this is here. So I've been tripped up multiple times with arrays by not having unique keys. The good news is that's also how you can update an entry, right? If you want your array to be like a moving active thing, that's also how you update the array. So how you access this. So let's bring up the miscast magic. Is it going to be arcane? I think it's like arcane spellcasting. I don't want arcane coast. Component 2120. Okay. Because you can you need to do something just a little bit different to access it when it's a multi-element key. So first, I include that array. I include arcane descripts is just some macros for updating the description of the armor. This is some compatibility stuff with artisan stuff. Yeah, okay. And here's where we actually start processing it. And so I'm processing the keys as params, and then I'm processing their value as the item, because that's just the easiest way to pull it out. So params, you'll notice that we have down here, where is? I'm trying to find a usage of it. Params 3, and params 3. In this array, so I'm using params as the key value. This is params _0, _1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, however many you have. I don't know that there's a limit. I can't imagine you need anything that big, but so I'm specifically looking at this column. This is the column where I have all the miscast magic values. So basically I'm using this and this. So _channel 1 should have a 30% miscast penalty. So basically we're making sure that the penalty is not 0 or 255. If it's 0, it means if it's 0, it's something like Elven Chain, which shouldn't have any casting penalties. If it's 255, it's something like a Robe, which shouldn't be processed. So basically this is a sanity check, and we're copying it. We're doing a sanity check. We're making sure it's an armor or a shield. That's what the type check is for. We delete any existing miscast penalties. 145, this is the opcode to delete the spell selection button from the UI. And then This is compatibility with Artisan stuff. We delete any F files that essentially do the same. And then if it's the enhanced edition, we basically, on original Baldur's Gate, we just add a miscast penalty with params 3 as a value. So this is where we basically add the 30% miscast. On the enhanced edition, we actually just do it through an EFF because that gives us compatibility with Artisan stuff. So that's the reason why it does. Oh, and EFFs with equip timing don't work on the original. So on the original, I have to use opcode 60. On the enhanced editions, I use opcode 17. I use Fs to do it. That basically points to an F with an opcode 60. And then I update the description. So that's how you would access a multi-item key array, right? Each one of those is params. If we were looking at thieving, it would be the same, except it would cover params 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8. Original Baldur's Gate combines hide and shadows and move silently as one stat called stealth. So it'll either use like these two as hide and shadows and move silently, or it will use stealth if it's being run on original Baldur's Gate or original Icewind Dale before those two were separated. So that is your multi-element array. And like I said, you can see this is awful. This is by far one of the most awful things I have to maintain for tweaks. I wrote an entire tool so that if people find armor that's not found on it, if you've ever noticed there's like a Tweaks Anthology helper tool, it's to help me find armor and shields that are not already covered in this god-awful manual list. But yeah, this is probably about as crazy as arrays get. So they're a nice little way to build lists of stuff. One other place where I often use them is actually I think Icewindification has another example. Let me pull that up. All right, let's go back to Icewindification. One of the things I do, for example, is we use the... Oh, is it not? Okay. No, why is Icewindification not popping up when I do that? There we go. Okay. Like, for example, one of the components is, like, we use the Paladin or Druid ability tables. And so, let's just find a reference to kit list. Okay. So, for example, this is... Okay, yeah. So this is the component to give Icewind Dale style Paladin abilities to Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2 Paladins. And it does that by altering their collab, their kit table. And so what I do to account for the fact that mods can add Paladin kits is we basically go through kit list. Oh, let me take a step. We first define the default Paladin table. This is the default string reference of the Paladin description. So basically I've made a very simple array that is the description, the string ref with the description of the Paladin, the default Paladin table. I forget what the third value is. Oh, it's kit ID. Because this is the base class, it's just given a 0, and then just given a value of 1. Then I go through kit list and I look for anything. If the class is 6, that means it's a Paladin kit. I grab the kit ID, I grab its table, and I grab its description, and we add to this table, right? We're adding to CD Pal collabs. So we started off with just the class because that's always the base Paladin class always uses this table, always uses this description. But while there are 3 Paladin kits by default, mods can add more. So we look through kit lists and we gather anything that's a Paladin class. So this is what allows me to go through and modify Paladins whether we're talking Cavaliers and Inquisitors or whether we're talking, a mod added Paladin kit, including ones that I haven't even heard of, right? I mean, it doesn't matter who adds it. If it's being added to kit list as a Paladin kit, this bit of code will find it and add it to the array. And then we just process it. we look through and we're like, okay, if you've already got, I think what it does is it changes. Yeah. So the two major changes are like detect evil becomes like an at will ability, or no, protection from evil becomes at will, but it only protects the paladin. So essentially what I'm doing is if the table has protection from evil, then okay, that's what that value is. Okay, so we're doing a working example here. This is excellent. So the basic paladin has protection from evil. So I go ahead and set it to 1. The rest I set to 0 because I'm not sure. Because this, especially on the EEs, these could be evil paladins, right? This could be a blackguard. So if the paladin gets protection from evil, we update that array entry with a value of 1 instead of the 0. This is basically my marker that says this is a real paladin kit that I need to process. That's what that does. Okay, now I got it. And so if it is, then I go ahead and do these table adjustments. And I update the collab table, and then I update the kit description. Okay, that's what that was for. So this, again, I'm coming back to old code that I haven't done thing for a while. Okay. So Increment is asking, is the list very time consuming for Waidu? Honestly, the thing that I found, keep in mind Waidu was written for a 20-year-old game. And it's actually, for what it does, it's fairly light. The places where I found Waidu is slow is file operations. Like I've never found any sort of processing like this, like iterating through arrays or processing variables, or even like if I'm copying a file, once I have the file open, like whether I'm doing, a 2-line patch or a 10,000 line patch, I feel like that's very, very quick. But if I'm going through regular expressions where I'm copying, I'm copying every creature in the game, it's like, cause I'm looking for something, or if I'm, copying every item in the game and I'm looking for something, those are slow. But I don't think I've ever seen a real big slowdown, certainly not for arrays. Because again, right, this is all command line. It's pretty light. Even this awful array that I use for the armor, I mean, this thing is still only, 1,500 lines? And its file size is probably only a couple of K, I would guess. The common armor list. I mean, it's 182K. I mean, this is all fairly light. Like I said, the big slowdowns I see are like whenever you're doing, copy existing regep and you're copying all items in the game, or you're copying all areas in the game, or you're copying all creatures, right? Those are your big pain points. The only mod I can think of that has slowdowns in processing is something like Sword Coast Stratagems, and that's because David wrote that before we had functions in Waidu. And he said himself that, if he had functions, he wouldn't have had to do that, because the first versions of Stratagems basically tapped into Perl. It basically had a Perl compiler shipped with it, because the only way he could do the kind of mass on-the-fly script and AI adaptations that he wanted to do was to actually compile stuff like that in Perl. So Sword Coast Stratagems, like I know people complain, it takes so long to install. That's because David, it's kind of like how I did with the joinable NPC arrays, right? I do it once where I do one regep where I copy all creatures, and then after that I just use the lighter array. David basically does that for all item types and all creature types and all area types. And so there's a lot of overhead that comes with he calls it It's SFO, but I forget what it stands for. But it's got a lot of overhead, which is why stratagems might be the one place where you're going to see slowdown from processing. But that's just because it's incredibly thorough. He's basically written that as like a proper language framework. Like if you were a programmer, you would look at SFO and it would feel very, very familiar, as opposed to the very kind of ad hoc silliness that is a lot of Waidu code and a lot of Waidu commands. So I would say, if you're worried about, unless you're doing something like Anthology where you're constantly doing like full item regular expressions or, full area regular expressions, I wouldn't worry too much about processing power and processing speed. I've never run into any problems, and I think not so much now, but probably for a good 90% of the time that we've had modding on Baldur's Gate 2, Anthology was always the bleeding edge. It's not so much anymore, but it was always kind of the boundary pusher, and even it, I don't think ever really had any big slowdowns. Like stratagems, I think is probably the worst case right now in terms of taxing the processing power. The other thing that I don't know if you guys have ever noticed, but if you go to, if you ever look in one of your debug files, it's got this whole section here at the end of timings about what took how long. I don't think these are terribly accurate, but this would give you an idea of where your slowdowns might be. And one other thing. Okay, so file operations are slow. One of the reasons why, let me pull it back open again. I have this. Where's my game checks? So I wrote this for tweaks, but I've started using it more and more elsewhere. And so essentially what this does is that if you go into the Waidu docs, right, you can do game is checks for, and then it's got like 15, it's got all of these options, right? These are all the options that you can use as a game is check. You can also do a game includes check for expansions and whatnot. What I found is that, because I remember I found this out the hard way, where I basically I was doing like a regular expression across all items, but then because the item formats are slightly different, inside that regular expression, I had a game is check. So like if it's Icewind Dale, find your item offsets here, or if it's original Baldur's Gate, find your item offsets here. And it was dog slow, because essentially what these game is checks are internally was Waidu goes and looks for a file. So basically you're in the middle of a file copy and it says, hold on, it checks another file and then it comes back. So it's just like, it was so freaking slow. So what I do for Anthology, and what I've started doing for more and more mods, is I basically do a game is check for everything. And I set all these variables. So if you ever look inside Anthology, you're not going to find proper game is checks, right? You're going to see, I'm looking to just see if the is, BG2E. So instead of a game is check, you're going to see me checking variables like this. And that's because I do all of my game is checks once up front, and then I check variables from then on out, because variable checks are pretty much instant. The other thing it allows me to do is, in addition to all the game is and the game includes, I also set another, these are some other bespoke variables that I use a lot too. Like whether this is the big one, right? Whether it's an enhanced edition or not. I combined like my 3 Icewind Dale checks into whether it's original Icewind Dale or not. Same with BG, same with 2-2. And then, between the game includes and the game is checks, I can dial it down to whatever I need. So just keep in mind when you do stuff, game is a file operation. So like I said, if you shove a game is check inside a regular expression copy, you will see slowdown. That is the one place I will say you will definitely see a slowdown. but again, for the most part, unless you're doing, a tweak mod where you're doing a lot of regular expression copies, it's not going to matter, right? I mean, if you're copying like 10 files and you're doing a game as check inside of them, you're not going to notice. If you're doing, a copy expression regep of all items in the game where there's 4,000 files, you will see the slowdown, right? There, you definitely need to not put a game as check inside of that. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. So, and if you do find yourself doing a lot of mods that like span a couple of games, this is in our modding resources folder on G3. You're welcome to use it. You can see I wrote it originally for Anthology, and I'm using it more and more. Oh, which ironically, Tweaks Anthology is not listed here, even though it's what I wrote it for. That's really funny. Okay. But yeah, so just keep in mind that game is just basically, it's another file check, right? If you look before we had game is checks, you would have things like whether or not you had people checking for the common check for if it was a thrown a ball game was you check for Melisandre's creature file. And those just got formalized into the Waidu code itself. I'm pretty sure you can go into the repo and see what files exactly it checks to determine if something is, 2/2 or something is Baldur's Gate 2 or if something is Icewind Dale. Like I think the 2/2 check is it just checks for like underscores, the 2/2 version of a bastard sword. So just keep in mind all those game is are and game includes for that matter too are also just file checks. So so I think that's arrays, right? So I think we covered our very simple examples. We covered how you definitely absolutely need to make sure your keys are unique. You can update values. I didn't cover the alternative form is let me just write this out really quick. Let me go back to one of my arrays here. Let me go back to the simple array. Here we go. This is the long form of array. This is what I prefer because it's a little more, to me at least, it's more readable. However, so let's just take this. So this is, we're just going to use just one element to demonstrate. Oops. That's the long form way you can write this. You can also outer sprint $, the array name, because it's a sprint, it's just going to be this. These two are equivalent. These are two ways of saying the exact same thing. So if you see a $sign on something, it's an array, right? And same thing, right? This is your left-hand value. This is your right-hand value. If this was numeric, instead of outer sprint, you would do something like outer set, because we're talking about numbers instead of strings, to, equal to 10. So this is the alternate construct you'll see for arrays. It's just shorthand. I'm very much the type of person where if you read my code, I'm very into readable code. So even though this is shorter, you'll still see me tend to use the longer define associative array, this very formalized form, because for me, this is a lot more readable. Like in here, well, not here, but in the other one, in that Paladin example, which was, it's back in Icewindification. Right, like here, what I could have done is I could have done this as, $sign, set $sign CD pal collabs, blah, 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 equal to 0. Right, I could have done that instead. But I really, really much prefer the longer form, because to me that's more readable. One of the things I learned how to code in Perl, and if you know anything about programming, Perl is notorious for being exceptionally terse and self-obfuscating. So I tend to comment a lot more on my code than probably most people do. And that's why, because I learned on Perl, where you have to comment everything. And that's also why
We can go back to our dialogue example. Oh, did I close it? No, I didn't. Okay. If you open the mod of somebody like Lava, or I think maybe Jasty too, you can, I've got like if, wait, then begin, if, then do, exit, or reply, or whatever. Right? This can be shortened. All right, there's so many shortcuts in dialogue where you can just basically do almost all these can be replaced with pluses. So if you open up somebody who writes a lot of dialogue, you're just going to see pluses friggin' everywhere because they're familiar with enough that is easier for them to read. I very much prefer the longhand for the exact same reason, right? I can be in here and be like, okay, here's my wait, here's my begin, here's my say. This is if it's just pluses, it's like, is that a do? Is that a reply? Is that a trigger? I prefer the longhand just because, especially me, where I've got God knows how many mods I maintain now. It's easier for me to jump back and forth between projects if I use longhand. But that's something for you guys to decide what's easier for yourselves. Especially as you find yourself maintaining more and more stuff. So just be aware that there's like alternative ways to designate stuff. So, all right. So we are 2 hours in. I definitely need a break. So we're going to take a quick little break. I'm not sure if we have anything else to cover today. So it might just be we come back and call it a day and then come back tomorrow unless you guys have something that you really want to cover or talk about. But let's take a quick break and then we'll come back. And then we'll see if we continue or whether we call it a day. So, all right, be right back. All right, so I just took a quick little look through like the thread and what is left for folks that want to cover stuff. I don't think there's anything. There's a lot of like little small minor requests that I think I need to sit down and organize a little bit. So I don't think I have anything big or broad that we want to tackle here at the end. So I think for today, let's just call it, and we'll start again tomorrow at 9 a.m. Again, if there's something that you want covered, add it to the thread or add it to a comment or toss it in chat or even hop on our Discord. But otherwise, I think that's going to be it for today. Just a couple of hours, and then tomorrow we'll pick it up tomorrow. And then I think depending on Saturday's still up in the air. I'm still not sure if we're going to do Saturday or not. So, but we'll be back tomorrow at 9 a.m. to continue. So thanks everybody for joining. Appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. Bye guys.